Emily never liked looking at herself in pictures anymore. The photo albums that rested on her coffee table were filled with younger versions of her, moments where her laughter seemed brighter and her eyes more alive. On a Sunday afternoon, she found herself flipping through those albums again. The house was quiet, the only sound coming from the clock ticking on the wall. The sun poured in through the curtains, warm and soft, catching dust motes in the air. She sighed, touching a photo of herself on the beach years ago, her hair blowing in the wind, her husband Michael's arm around her shoulder. Daniel, her son, had just come back from college that weekend. He walked into the living room, holding a cup of coffee, and noticed the way she lingered on that picture. He leaned against the doorway, watching her quietly before speaking. "You look so different in those photos, Mom," he said, his tone gentle, not teasing. Emily smiled faintly, brushing her fingers across the picture. "That was a long time ago." Daniel stepped forward and sat on the edge of the couch. "You still look beautiful," he said suddenly. The words came out naturally, almost without thought, and Emily turned to him surprised. He was grown now, taller, confident, with a maturity in his voice that hadn't been there when he left for school. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Before she could, Daniel leaned back and said, "Why don't I take a picture of you today?" Emily laughed nervously, shaking her head. No, I don't look the same. I wouldn't want to see myself like that." But Daniel didn't back down. His eyes held a quiet determination. "That's not true. You're just not used to being in front of the camera anymore. Let me take one picture. Just one. You'll see what I mean." There was something in his voice that reminded her of Michael, how he used to encourage her, how he always believed she was worth capturing, even on the days when she felt ordinary. Emily hesitated, looking at her son. His expression wasn't playful, it was sincere. He really wanted to do this. "All right," she said finally, her voice soft. "Just one picture." Daniel smiled, stood up, and walked to the corner where his camera bag rested. He had brought it home from school, where he had been studying photography as one of his electives. He pulled out the camera carefully, adjusting the strap around his neck, checking the lens as though preparing for something important. Emily felt her heart quicken. It had been so long since someone had asked her to pose. She brushed her hair back with her fingers and stood slowly, unsure of where to go. Daniel noticed her hesitation. "Come outside, Mom. The light's perfect right now." They stepped into the small backyard garden. The roses that Michael had planted years ago had grown wild against the wooden fence, their red petals glowing in the late afternoon sun. Emily stood near them, her hands loosely clasped in front of her. She felt awkward, exposed, like she didn't know what to do. Daniel lifted the camera, his voice calm. "Just look at me. Don't think about it. Just look at me," Emily did. For a moment, all she saw was her son, tall and steady, holding the camera with focus and care. He pressed the button. Click. The sound startled her more than she expected. Her heart fluttered, and she almost laughed at how silly it felt. But Daniel lowered the camera and grinned. "That was perfect," she shook her head. "I probably looked ridiculous." "Not at all," he replied firmly. "You'll see." Emily felt something stir deep in her chest. It wasn't about the picture itself. It was about being noticed, about being seen. Michael used to do this. He would catch her in those small, ordinary moments and tell her she was beautiful, even when she didn't believe it. Daniel's voice, his insistence, carried the same weight now. It caught her off guard, left her both warm and uneasy. Daniel snapped a few more photos, asking her to move slightly, to turn her face toward the sun, to let her hair fall naturally. His directions were simple, but there was a tenderness in the way he spoke. He wasn't just taking a picture. He was looking at her carefully, with a kind of respect and affection that reached deeper than words. When he finally lowered the camera, he said softly, "You know, you don't need old pictures to remember who you are. You're still her, Mom. You've always been." Emily swallowed, her throat tight. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear something like that, how much she had been hiding behind the belief that her best years were behind her. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not as someone fading into the background, but as a woman who still carried beauty, who still mattered. Daniel walked over and showed her the camera screen. Emily gasped quietly. She didn't expect to see herself like that. Standing among the roses, the sun outlining her hair, her expression soft and alive. She almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. "That's not me," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "It is. That's how I see you." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she took the camera from him, staring at the image. A rush of emotions washed over her. Pride, sorrow, gratitude, and something she couldn't quite name. The picture wasn't just a picture. It was a reminder of what she had lost, and also of what still remained. For years, she had avoided the camera, afraid of what it might reveal, afraid of facing the changes time had written on her. But now, looking at herself through Daniel's eyes, she realized there was more to her than what she thought she had lost. She turned to her son, tears threatening her eyes but a smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel nodded, his gaze steady, filled with quiet affection. "Any time, Mom." The moment lingered between them, delicate and full of meaning. Emily knew that something had shifted. This wasn't just about a photograph. It was about being seen again, about remembering that love, in its many forms, had the power to make her feel alive. She handed the camera back, but inside, she carried the image with her. That single offer, "Let me take your picture," had opened a door she hadn't even realized was locked, and Emily had no idea how much further that door was about to open. The air outside was crisp, the kind of autumn afternoon where the sky stretched endlessly blue and the sunlight carried a golden warmth. Emily stood in her backyard, the roses blooming wild around her. She smoothed her dress nervously, unsure of what to do with her hands. It felt strange, standing there under her son's gaze, waiting for the click of the camera. She wasn't used to being the focus anymore. For years she had been behind the scenes, cooking dinners, keeping the house together, carrying the quiet weight of loss. Now, suddenly, she was the subject. Daniel adjusted the camera strap around his neck, crouching slightly as he tried to find the right angle. He didn't rush. His movements were careful, deliberate. "Don't worry about posing," he said, his voice calm. "Just be yourself," Emily forced a smile. "That's easier said than done." Daniel shook his head, raising the lens. "You don't have to do anything. Just look at me." She did. For a second, all she saw was her son, standing tall, his eyes steady. But then something shifted. The way he was looking at her. It wasn't just the look of a boy with a camera. It was the look of someone who truly wanted to capture something real, something fragile. It was the same way Michael had once looked at her, years ago, when he had insisted that her beauty wasn't in the way she posed, but in the way she lived. Click. The sound startled her more than she expected. It echoed in her chest, stirring old memories. She remembered standing on the beach with Michael, the wind pulling at her hair, his voice laughing as he told her not to move because the light was perfect. She remembered the way he'd hold the camera steady, convinced that every angle of her was worth remembering. The sound of Daniel's camera brought all of it rushing back. Emily blinked, pushing the memories away before they overwhelmed her. "How do I look?" she asked, her tone half teasing. Daniel lowered the camera, his mouth curving into a grin. "Like yourself," he said simply. "That's the best look." His words struck deeper than he knew. She didn't feel like herself anymore, not the woman in the photos she used to be, not the one who had once been adored and seen. She felt older, heavier, faded around the edges. But Daniel's eyes didn't reflect that. He looked at her with quiet certainty, as though he saw something she couldn't. He raised the camera again. "Look away from me this time," he said gently. "Just think about something that makes you happy." Emily turned her head toward the roses, letting the sunlight fall across her face. For a moment, she thought of the mornings when Michael used to play the piano in the living room, the sound filling the house with warmth. She thought of the way Daniel, as a little boy, would sit beside his father, trying to press the keys with his tiny hands. Click. This time, Emily didn't flinch. The sound felt softer, almost comforting. Daniel stepped closer, adjusting the angle, lowering his voice. "Don't force it, Mom, just breathe." She exhaled slowly, and something in her expression loosened. Her shoulders dropped, her eyes softened, and without realizing it, she smiled. Not the practiced kind, but the kind that came naturally, the kind she hadn't felt in years. Click. Daniel lowered the camera again, his expression thoughtful. "That one," he murmured, almost to himself. Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He glanced at her, his eyes shining in the sunlight. "You'll see when I show you. It's not about the pose. It's about the moment." Emily's heart tightened. Michael used to say the exact same thing. "It's not the smile I want. It's the moment I don't want to lose." Hearing those words in Daniel's voice made her throat ache. For a while, Daniel continued, capturing her as she leaned against the wooden fence, as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, as she tilted her face toward the light. He didn't direct her much anymore. He simply let her exist, let her move naturally, and every now and then, he pressed the shutter. The rhythm of it became soothing. At one point she laughed at herself, the sound surprising her. "I must look ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. Daniel lowered the camera and shook his head firmly. "You don't. You look like you." Emily's laughter faded into silence. His tone was so steady, so certain that she didn't argue. Instead, she looked down at the ground, her chest tightening with emotions she couldn't name. She hadn't realized how much she missed being noticed. Not as a mother, not as someone doing chores or paying bills, but as a woman. A whole, living woman. Daniel lifted the camera one more time. "Okay, last one," he said softly. "Just look at me again." She did. And in that moment, she didn't see her son holding the camera. She saw Michael years ago, looking at her like she was the only person in the world. The memory overlapped with the present, filling her with warmth and ache all at once. Click. The sound lingered in the air, louder than before. Final. Emily exhaled slowly, blinking back the sting in her eyes. She didn't know why she felt so heavy, so alive, so fragile all at once. Daniel lowered the camera and walked over to her. He didn't say anything at first, just offered her the camera so she could see. Emily hesitated before taking it. When her eyes landed on the screen, she froze. The picture showed her with her head tilted slightly, the sunlight outlining her hair, her expression soft and distant. She didn't look like a woman worn down by years of loss. She didn't look like someone invisible. She looked alive. Her lips parted slightly. "That's not me," she whispered. Daniel smiled, his voice low. "It is. That's exactly you." Emily stared at the image, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the camera. She wanted to argue, to insist that she no longer looked like that she wasn't the woman in the picture anymore. But she couldn't, because for the first time in a long time she recognized something she thought had disappeared. She wasn't just seeing herself. She was seeing herself through Daniel's eyes, and that changed everything. The evening came quietly, carrying a stillness that always seemed to arrive after a long autumn day. The golden light outside dimmed into soft shades of orange, then gray, before the house settled into the comfort of lamps and shadows. Emily sat on the couch with Daniel's camera resting in her lap. He had gone upstairs to unpack, leaving her alone with the images he had taken. At first, she hesitated to scroll through them. She wasn't sure she wanted to see what the lens had caught, afraid it might only remind her of how much she had changed. But curiosity pressed against her hesitation, and with a slow breath, she clicked the screen awake. The first picture appeared, her standing by the roses, sunlight brushing her shoulders. Her breath caught. She barely recognized herself. The woman staring back wasn't perfect, but there was something alive in her expression, something she hadn't seen in years. She went to the next photo. This one was softer. Her head was turned slightly, her eyes cast downward, lips parted in a quiet, thoughtful way. And that was when her heart stumbled, because she had seen this exact look before. It was in one of Michael's old photographs, taken on their anniversary at a small inn by the coast. She remembered that day so clearly. She had been standing by a window, staring at the ocean, lost in her thoughts. Michael had called her name, and when she turned, he had clicked the shutter. The picture captured her in a way that felt too raw, too real. He had laughed and told her it was his favorite photo of her, the one where she looked like herself, unguarded, beautiful without even trying. And now, here it was again. The same angle, the same softness in her eyes, but this time captured not by her husband, but by her son. Emily's chest tightened, her eyes stinging with sudden tears. It was as if the past had folded itself into the present. The resemblance between Michael's photograph and Daniel's was haunting, too precise to ignore. She placed a hand over her mouth, trying to steady herself. She scrolled further, seeing more images. Some were playful, some more serious. Yet one thread remained. Daniel had looked at her the way Michael once had. His pictures didn't just capture her face. They captured something deeper, the quiet emotions she thought no one noticed anymore. Her fingers lingered on one photo longer than the rest. It showed her half-turned, the light falling across her cheek. She looked fragile and strong all at once, like someone holding both love and grief in the same breath. She felt her pulse quicken. It wasn't vanity. It wasn't even nostalgia. It was recognition, the startling realization that someone still saw her, still noticed her, still believed there was beauty in her presence. "Mom?" Emily startled at Daniel's voice. She hadn't heard him come back down the stairs. He stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, watching her quietly. She turned the camera toward her chest, hiding the screen. "I didn't hear you," she said softly. He smiled faintly and walked closer, sitting beside her on the couch. "You were looking at the photos," Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're beautiful, but they remind me of something." Daniel leaned in slightly. "Of Dad?" Her throat tightened. She hadn't expected him to say it so directly, but his eyes carried a knowing look. She nodded, unable to speak at first. "Yes, he used to take pictures of me. He saw me the way you do." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady. Then he said softly, "Maybe that's because I learned from him, even without knowing it." Emily turned toward him, her heart twisting. His words settled inside her, heavy but comforting. She realized how much of Michael lived in Daniel, not just in his features, but in the way he looked at the world, the way he carried kindness without needing to announce it. "Do you want to see the one I like best?" Daniel asked gently, reaching for the camera. Emily hesitated, then handed it to him. He scrolled quickly, then stopped on one photo and turned the screen toward her. It was the one where she had been looking away, lost in thought, her face soft and open. "That's my favorite," he said quietly. Emily pressed her hand against her chest. She wanted to speak, but no words came. The photograph wasn't just an image. It was a reflection of something she had forgotten, something she wasn't sure she deserved to still carry. Daniel studied her face as she stared at the picture. "You don't see yourself like that, do you?" he asked, his tone filled with a strange sadness. Emily shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the screen. "No, I see someone older. Someone tired." Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts, firm but tender. "That's not what I see. I see someone strong, someone who's been through more than I can imagine and still stands. I see someone beautiful." The word hung in the air, heavier than either of them expected. Emily's breath caught, and she turned to him slowly. His eyes were sincere, clear, unflinching. He wasn't saying it out of duty or to comfort her. He meant it. The silence that followed was thick, filled with emotions neither of them had planned to share. Emily felt the old ache of longing rise inside her, the longing to be loved, to be noticed, to be seen as more than just the roles she played. She handed the camera back to him, her hands trembling slightly. "You have your father's gift," she whispered. "The way you see people, the way you see me, it's the same." Daniel lowered the camera onto the table, his gaze never leaving hers. "Maybe I just see what's already there." Her chest tightened again, her heart heavy with both grief and something new, something she didn't dare name. She looked away, her eyes landing on the framed wedding photo above the fireplace. She and Michael stood smiling in that picture, young and certain, holding on to a future that had once felt endless. But now, sitting beside her son, Emily felt the weight of both past and present colliding. The photographs Daniel had taken weren't just pictures. They were reminders. They were mirrors. They were pieces of herself she thought had been buried with Michael, now brought back into the light. Her fingers brushed the edge of the camera again, as though touching it might steady her. But deep inside, she knew this moment wasn't about the device. It was about the way Daniel looked at her, the way he saw her without effort, the way his presence reminded her that she was still alive, still worthy of being remembered. And as the firelight flickered in the corner of the room, Emily realized she was standing at the edge of something she didn't fully understand. The shadows of the past had returned. But this time they weren't pulling her back. They were leading her somewhere new. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every small sound seem louder. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint crackle of the fire in the living room, the ticking clock on the mantel, all of it pressed against the silence that hung heavy between memory and the present. Emily sat in her favorite chair near the fireplace, staring at the wedding photo on the wall. The glass frame reflected the flames, giving life to the faces of her and Michael on their happiest day. Her fingers held a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink, and her eyes carried the weight of years. She thought about the pictures Daniel had taken earlier, the way they had stirred feelings she hadn't expected. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was something sharper, something that touched places inside her that had been locked away. She shifted slightly in her chair, the warmth of the fire brushing her face, but the ache in her chest refusing to leave. The sound of footsteps broke the silence. Daniel walked into the room, his hair still damp from a shower, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. He glanced at her, then at the photo on the wall, and without asking, sat down in the chair across from her. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look older, almost like the man Michael once was. "You miss him," Daniel said quietly. His voice didn't waver, but it carried an understanding that startled her. Emily's throat tightened. She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the photo. "Every day," she whispered. "He was the one who always reminded me I was worth noticing. He saw me when I felt invisible. That's what I miss most." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His eyes softened as he watched her. "You're still worth noticing, Mom. More than you realize." Her gaze shifted to him, surprised by the weight in his words. He wasn't saying it like a son comforting his mother. He was saying it like someone who believed it with every part of him. Emily set her cup down on the small table beside her. The firelight flickered across her face as she whispered, "Sometimes I feel like the woman in that picture doesn't exist anymore. That she left with him." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, she's still here. I saw her today. In the garden. In every photo I took." He paused, his voice lowering. "That's why I wanted to take them in the first place. Because you don't see yourself the way I see you." The room grew heavier, the silence between them thick with unspoken emotions. Emily felt her heart racing, unsure if she should look away or meet his eyes. But something about the honesty in his tone held her there, as though he had spoken a truth she had long avoided. "You sound so much like your father," she said softly, her voice trembling. "He used to say things like that. He made me feel alive even when I doubted myself." Daniel's eyes flickered with something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. "Maybe it's because I feel the same way," he said carefully. "I don't want you to forget who you are. I don't want you to fade into someone who doesn't believe she's worth being seen." Emily's breath caught. His words were unexpected, almost too close, too raw. She looked back at the flames, trying to steady herself, but the warmth in her chest betrayed her calm. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, not just as comfort, but as truth. "Do you know what scares me most?" she asked after a long pause. Daniel shook his head. "That one day I'll disappear," she whispered. "Not physically, but in the way people remember me, that no one will look at me and see more than a shadow of what I once was." Daniel leaned closer, his voice breaking softly. "That will never happen. Not while I'm here, because I see you, Mom. Not as someone fading. I see you as someone who still matters, who still carries beauty, who still deserves to be loved." Her eyes lifted to his slowly, her chest tightening with emotions she hadn't felt in years. The firelight shimmered against her tears, and she swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. His words didn't feel like the usual reassurances family gave each other. They felt heavier, more real, as though he had reached into the very place she had hidden her loneliness and touched it gently. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was full, charged with meaning, with something neither of them dared name. Emily felt her heart ache in a way that was both painful and tender. She thought of Michael, of the love they had shared, and of the years that had passed without it. And now, sitting across from her son, she felt a strange connection building, a reminder that love could still exist, though not in the ways she expected. Daniel finally leaned back, his eyes still on her. "Promise me something," he said. Emily blinked. "What?" "Promise me you won't stop letting yourself be seen. Don't hide away from the camera, from life, from people. Don't let yourself believe you're invisible, because you're not to me." Her lips parted and she wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded slowly, her chest swelling with unspoken gratitude. For a long moment, they simply sat there, the fire between them, their eyes holding on to each other's. It felt fragile, like a thread stretched tight, ready to snap if either of them moved too quickly. Yet it also felt unshakable, like something had shifted between them forever. Emily finally whispered, "Thank you, Daniel." He smiled faintly, his voice steady. "You don't have to thank me. I just told you the truth." The fire cracked, sending a small spark upward, and Emily looked back at the wedding photo once more. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the woman in that picture was gone. She felt like she was still here, still alive, still capable of being seen. And it wasn't only because of the memories of her husband. It was because her son had reminded her, in the most unexpected way, that love, in all its forms, had the power to bring her back to herself. As the night stretched on, Emily realized that conversation would stay with her forever. It wasn't just about grief. It wasn't just about photographs. It was about the bond she hadn't known still existed. A bond that reached past roles, past years, past silence, and reminded her that she was still more than enough. And though she didn't say it out loud, she knew in her heart that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning light poured into the kitchen, soft and golden, wrapping the house in a quiet calm. Emily moved slowly, still carrying the weight of the conversation from the night before. Her thoughts lingered on Daniel's words, how he had told her she was still worth noticing, still beautiful, still here. The honesty in his voice had shaken her, and she couldn't stop hearing it, even now as she tried to steady her hands pouring coffee into 2 cups. Daniel walked in, his hair tousled, looking younger in the morning light, yet carrying a heaviness in his eyes. He slid into a chair at the table, silent for a moment, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She set the cup in front of him, her hand brushing the table nervously. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" Daniel asked softly. Emily sat opposite him, smiling faintly. "Neither did you." They shared a quiet laugh, but it faded quickly. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with everything unspoken between them. Emily reached for her cup, but before she could take a sip, Daniel leaned forward, his hands clasped together tightly. "Mom," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Can I tell you something?" Emily set her cup down, her heart picking up pace. She nodded gently. "Of course." Daniel's eyes flickered down to the table, then back up to hers. "Yesterday, when I took those photos, when I saw you through the lens, it didn't feel like I was just taking pictures of my mom. It felt like I was seeing someone I didn't want to lose, someone who still means more than I can explain." Emily's breath caught. His words came out with such raw truth that she couldn't look away. She searched his eyes, trying to understand, trying to steady herself against the rush of emotion that filled her chest. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling, but he didn't stop. "I know you think of yourself as older, as someone who's already lived her story, but I don't see that. I see a woman who still carries so much beauty, so much strength, and I can't stand the thought of you not knowing that." Tears welled in Emily's eyes before she could stop them. She shook her head gently, struggling to find the right words. "You shouldn't have to say these things to me. You're my son. It's not your burden to make me feel alive again." Daniel's voice broke, filled with emotion. "But maybe it is. Maybe I'm the only one who can, because I see you, not as a shadow, not as someone fading, but as the person you are right now. And I don't want you to forget that." The kitchen felt smaller, the air heavier. Emily reached for his hand across the table, her fingers trembling as they touched his. His hand was warm, steady, grounding her in the storm of feelings she didn't know how to name. "Your father used to tell me the same things," she whispered. "He made me believe I was worth loving. And when he was gone, I thought that part of me went with him. I thought no one would ever see me like that again." Daniel's grip tightened gently around her hand. "He was right, Mom, and I see it too. Maybe that's the gift he left us both." Emily's tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she let herself feel the weight of the moment, the grief, the longing, the love that still found its way into her life through her son's eyes. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice unsteady, "you don't know what your words mean to me. You've given me back something I thought I had lost forever." He held her gaze, his expression tender, almost fierce in its honesty. "Then promise me you won't hide from it anymore. Promise me you'll let yourself be seen." Emily nodded slowly, her heart swelling with both sorrow and gratitude. "I promise." The moment stretched between them, fragile yet unbreakable. The morning light glowed against the window, painting them in warmth. Emily realized then that love didn't end when Michael died. It lived on, in memories, in gestures, in the way Daniel carried his father's tenderness, in the way he looked at her now. She leaned back slightly, her hand still in his, and let out a long breath. "You've changed everything for me, Daniel. You've reminded me that I'm still alive, still here, still worth noticing." A small smile touched his lips. "That's all I ever wanted." The tears in her eyes turned into a soft, trembling smile. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. Not because the grief was gone, it never would be, but because she had discovered something she thought impossible. She had found a new bond, one that didn't erase the past but carried it forward in a different form. The photographs weren't just pictures anymore. They were proof. Proof that she was still more than she believed. Proof that love could find its way back to her heart through the most unexpected places. As the morning sun climbed higher, Emily looked at her son and saw not just the boy she had raised, but the man who had reminded her of who she still was. Their eyes met, and in that quiet exchange, she felt something settle inside her. A peace, a renewal, a promise that she would never again let herself disappear into the background of her own life. "Come on," Daniel said after a moment. Standing and reaching for the camera on the counter. "Let's take one more picture. Just one more. This time, I want you to smile the way you feel right now." Emily stood, wiping her eyes, her heart full. She walked to the window where the light spilled in, turning to face him. She didn't need to force a smile. It came easily, naturally, shining through the tears. Click. The sound no longer startled her. This time, it felt like a beginning. When Daniel lowered the camera, Emily laughed softly through her tears. "I think that's the best one yet." He smiled back, his voice steady. "Sure. I know it is." And in that moment, standing in the sunlight with her son, Emily realized her story wasn't over. It was still being written, through love, through memory, and through the quiet, powerful bond that had surprised her in ways she never imagined. The past had shaped her. The grief had carved her. But the present reminded her she was still alive, still worthy, still seen, and with that, the woman in the photographs returned, not as someone she once was, but as who she had always been.